get started. I know we still have a number of people joining us. But to start, just want to let everybody know that we are going to be recording this webinar, and following the webinar, we will be putting the slides shown and a copy of the recording on our website at broadband.georgia.gov, just in case you want to go back and watch it, or if somebody on your team missed it, they're certainly welcome to see it on our website. With that, first of all, just wanted to run through a quick timeline. Obviously, we released our updated notice of funding opportunity earlier this week on the 16th. Here we are at the June 18th kickoff webinar. We will be doing another kickoff webinar once the application is open. But as of right now, we don't have set dates of when that's going to be, and I'll kind of explain why here in a moment. We are doing a letter of intent for this round. That is something that we've received a lot of questions already about. Regardless if you applied previously or not, everyone, if they want to participate in this upcoming round, will need to submit a letter of intent for this process. The main reason why we are doing this is this is obviously something we have to do very quickly. You know, we have a total of 90 days to run through all of the steps of this process. And so this will help us kind of gauge volume and kind of have teams and resources lined up for scoring. And so that's why we need everyone, regardless if you previously applied or not, to participate in the letter of intent process. And that is due by 5 o'clock p.m. close of business Eastern time on June 25th, next Wednesday. Please make sure if you plan or think you plan to apply to get your letter of intent in by that deadline. Late letters received after 5 p.m. will not be accepted. And if you do not submit a letter of intent, you will not be able to participate. Within 3 business days of receiving our initial proposal correction approval from NTIA, it is our plan to open the application portal. We are currently right now updating our portal that was used for round 1 to obviously align with all of the changes of the policy notice. That should be done here shortly and should be tested shortly and ready to go. The way that this process works, the state has to submit a letter to NTIA requesting to update our initial proposal. And then we have to receive approval from NTIA before we can open subgrantee selection. And so that's why we are not publishing dates yet for when the application portal will open and when it will close, because that is obviously dependent upon approval from NTIA for our initial proposal correction. So once we receive that, obviously through our newsletter group that obviously we've been using to share all of our communications, we will be posting the dates on our website and also sending that out through the newsletter to make sure that y'all are aware of the official dates. Again, we want to start moving very quickly here. It's just we are planning to submit our initial proposal correction letter to NTIA this Friday. We don't know how fast of a turnaround we will get on the letter. We're hoping it's quick since we are using their provided language. However, you know, we will be prepared with our application portal to go as soon as we have NTIA's approval. And again, as soon as we know when we're going to open the application window, we will also announce when the application window will close. As you can imagine, based on the timeline that we are on, you know, we have to move very quickly in order to meet our final proposal due date, which is September 4th. And so we are going to have to make sure that, you know, we get all of the information we need and score quickly, and make sure we get to all of our requirements of the final proposal and get that submitted by September 4th. So the long story short, the rounds are going to have to be pretty quick. We also are not sure necessarily if we can get to 100% with one round. So it is possible that we have to build in time to run a quick second round as well. With that, we've obviously received a lot of questions from previous applicants of kind of what you need to know, what you need to do. And obviously this will certainly be open to new applicants as well. But for the previous applicants, the biggest things that I would like to highlight are even if you previously applied, as I mentioned before, you need to submit your letter of intent by the deadline. Again, we are using this for staffing and resource purposes, so we need to know who all is planning to participate. What we will be doing is if you previously submitted an application in our portal, when the application window opens, all applications previously submitted will go back to draft status in the portal, meaning that all of the information that you put in the gating sections, all of the information that you put in the project sections will still be there. You can edit it, but in order to be considered for this round, you will have to resubmit that application. It's also important to make sure that you're reading through the application again, as we are working right now with our vendor to align our portal with the new NTIA requirements. There are a few additional new questions along with a number of questions that are being removed. So it's just important that you do review your applications prior to submitting or resubmitting an application. The other thing that is also going to be required if you previously applied is that you are going to need to update information within your project specific questions, just because as part of this process, and I'll explain it a little bit more in depth later when we go through some of NTIA's shared slides. We have to update the BEAD eligible locations using both the version 6 fabric and also the latest BDC that has been released. So essentially, we have to update which locations are eligible based on if they still appear in the fabric and based on their service availability based on the latest version of the FCC map. So based on updating that data, it's very likely that if you previously submitted an application for a project area, the number of eligible locations within that project area has more than likely changed based on this update. And so you will need to go back in and update the number of locations that you're applying for and update any network diagrams or anything like that that would be impacted based on the change of eligible locations. And all of those will be posted on our website at broadband.georgia.gov. We are just finalizing the data update, and as soon as we have that, it will be available online. With that, I'm going to, and also just really quickly to explain kind of what we have right now, we've changed out a lot of the information that we have available at broadband.georgia.gov. We do have a copy of our updated notice of funding opportunity. The information that we've been working with over the last couple of months for the location removal process. So essentially, if something should not be a BSL, if something is already served, we still have that information here in the template to how to submit that to us for consideration. We also have the essentially template or list of required items that are needed within your letter of intent by the end of the day on the 25th. And also our unlicensed fixed wireless location information, which I'll explain a little bit more in depth in just a moment. With that, I will actually come back to this in a moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second here and switch over to some of NTIA's slides to kind of give you more of an overview of some of the changes in the policy notice. And then at that point, we can come back and I will share my contact information again. Hopefully y'all can see my now PDF. So essentially just to quickly run through, and again, this is a lot of slides by NTIA. I did remove some of the slides, but what we will do, it's just for kind of speed, but what we will do is we will post all of NTI's full slide deck along with this webinar. Just wanted to highlight some of the main points for y'all related to the change in the policy notice, and then open this up for any of your questions. So with that, just wanted to run through some of the kind of key changes from the policy notice. And first we're going to go through essentially kind of the sections that were removed. Again, you'll see based on the page numbers, just for speed, I have removed some of their slides. So labor, employment, and workforce development requirements have been removed from the program. Essentially now this has been streamlined to where applicants are now only required to certify that they comply with all federal labor and employment requirements. So that is a change that you'll see in the application. A number of questions removed related to this section, but applicants still are going to be required to make sure that they can certify that they can meet these requirements. The next change is removal of the climate resiliency requirements. Essentially now essentially this kind of requirement is being met based on what's being submitted already based on kind of risk management plans and the cybersecurity and supply chain risk management information that is still asked in the application. The next change is essentially going back to essentially the IIJA language related to open access and net neutrality. The next change is the removal of the local coordination and stakeholder engagement kind of additional requirements. This requirement is now being met by the public posting of the final proposal. That is one thing to remember kind of in the 90-day window that the state has to conduct this additional grant round. We do have to post the final proposal for 14 days of public comment before we can submit. So that really makes it so that we have to be done by about mid-August with subgrantee selection so that we can post for public comment and then meet that September 4th deadline to submit our final proposal to NTIA. Next, they generally went back to the previous definition of essentially who is eligible to apply. We don't think that this will have an impact on Georgia since all of these organizations were able to apply previously, and there was nothing in state law that limited who was able to apply. The middle class affordability requirement for a plan has been removed. The low cost service option is an IIJA requirement. However, the way that we accept information for this has changed where the states are not allowed to set a dollar amount for a low cost service option. That is something that applicants will have to put in their application. What is your low cost service option that can meet the required speeds for the program. So that section has slightly changed in our application where applicants will just now be able to tell us what your low cost service option is that meets the speed requirements. One of the big changes to the program obviously is the removal of the fiber preference, and where we are going to be running this next grant round where we are going to be accepting applications from all technology types and weighing those together. So just to go into that a little bit, so if any state had already made awards, those had to be rescinded. All BEAD eligible project areas have to be opened up for one final round. So this round that we are talking about right now, and that they are restoring the definition of priority broadband back to the definition that was within the IIJA. So there is no specific technology preference, and again, everybody's going to be able to apply for the eligible locations in this upcoming round. Again, as I mentioned before, the new definition of priority broadband that is in the policy notice essentially just takes it back to a project that provides broadband service at speeds no less than 100 megabits in the download and 20 megabits in the upload, has latency less than or equal to 100 milliseconds, and can easily scale speeds over time to meet the evolving connectivity needs of households and businesses and support the development of 5G, successor wireless technologies, and other advanced services. So with that, again, just clarifying that the fiber preference has been removed. And so that's obviously why we're updating our portal as well so that we can accept applications from all provider types in this upcoming round. So essentially, again, everybody is eligible to apply together. And we will be running what NTIA is named the benefit of the bargain round, which is just this upcoming grant round. This is where again, we have to essentially, and this is one place I will say, please disregard NTIA slides, and we will make note of that when we are posting these. Essentially, it talks about, for previous applicants, what are you supposed to do? And we are saying disregard their advice to do nothing. We're essentially saying that these can be just immediately rescored. Again, we are going to be moving previous applications back to draft status. So you do have to do something. You do have to resubmit it, and you have to resubmit it based on the new eligible locations. And then we will be scoring based on the new rubric, which I'll get to here in just a moment. Essentially, we do have the ability to open pre-qualification. Georgia previously has essentially asked all of our questions all at once. And so we will be doing that again. And so the biggest thing on this is we cannot open subgrantee selection until we receive approval of our initial proposal correction from NTIA. So that is obviously what we're going to be waiting for here to open this. But it is important to note essentially kind of their little footnote here where we still do have the requirement of the previous NOFO, where we still do have to ensure that all applicants meet all of the financial, managerial, and technical and operational capability requirements that were previously there. So those are all the questions that we ask in the gating section. And so that is something that, even though this is kind of a short timeline to do all of this work, we still are required to verify that applicants can meet all of those requirements that were initially in the BEAD NOFO. We'll skip over that. So talking about the scoring rubric, some of the changes that are now in place is there is no extreme high cost threshold any longer. However, states essentially have to reasonably decide where essentially priority broadband is not financially feasible. And then at that point, if we have a non-priority broadband project, then we can look at that again, based on wherever we believe, again, is kind of the most economical and reasonable solution for that particular area. It is important to note that based on the IJ, we are, if a priority broadband project is submitted and it is reasonably priced, then we have to go with the priority broadband project. Again, however, at that point that it becomes to the point that it's not financially feasible, that's where we're able to start to look at other, other non-priority broadband projects. With that, also, the new scoring rubric is only going to look at the minimum BEAD outlay. So previously, based on NTIA's Notice of Funding Opportunity, we previously had to look at minimum BEAD outlay, affordability, and fair labor practices. The policy notice strikes the affordability and fair labor practices. And so we will be looking at just the minimum BEAD outlay. And so the only kind of caveat to that is when if two bids are within 15% of each other based on minimum BEAD outlay, then we can look at secondary scoring criteria. The secondary scoring criteria that we can look at is speed of network and other technical capabilities, where we can be looking at speed, latency, and the technology provided, scalability, and then also speed to deployment. And so based on that, again, two applications have to be within 15% of each other based on minimum BEAD outlay for us to look at secondary scoring criteria. And so states are able to assign points how they would like to secondary scoring criteria. And so that is something that we will be including in the FAQs that we're going to release on Friday. There's a lot of, it's a lengthy document already with hopefully trying to anticipate your questions and answering those. But we wanted to go ahead and get the Notice of Funding Opportunity out earlier this week. And so we will be providing additional information regarding secondary scoring criteria and the points assigned to it in our FAQs on Friday. And this is just talking about how the policy notice removes essentially any of the other secondary scoring criteria that was previously allowed by NTIA. Quickly talking about this, I'm going to kind of glance over this because we've already talked about it. But essentially, we are not required to rerun our challenge process during this process. But as I mentioned, the process that we've already been doing using NTIA's 1.2 final proposal guidance reason codes to remove locations, either if it's a barn or hay bale, or if it's an already served location. We've already been working through that process with y'all to remove locations that should not have been eligible BSLs. Essentially, the new policy guidance essentially just says, though, that we are required to do this. We had been doing it anyway, but the other thing is the policy guidance also makes it clear that we are now required to update to the latest fabric, and we are required to also update the availability data based on the FCC's latest version of the map. So again, we do believe that that is going to change, obviously, the number of locations that are eligible for BEAD. And as soon as we've got that data ready, hopefully by the end of the week, we will put that on our website so that you can start looking at that prior to the application portal actually opening. Oops. And again, this just talks about the various reason codes. Again, all of that's been available on our website for quite some time of why a location would essentially come out of eligibility. But again, we do expect that the data is going to somewhat change based on the fabric and BDC update. The biggest thing then is kind of talking about, what our steps are, and also looking at the requirements within the policy notice related to unlicensed fixed wireless. Unlicensed fixed wireless is now considered a, a served technology based on the policy notice if providers can respond and provide necessary information that they're able to mitigate any of the items that were listed in the policy notice. And so that is something that we're also working through that process as well. Essentially, states have to post a list of unlicensed fixed wireless locations that would be BEAD eligible. Public posting for 7 days. And that is something that we have had that information. I just showed you the screenshot of our broadband.georgia.gov. And so that 7 days, I believe, is up at close of business today. And then just running through really quickly again, the new technology or the new policy notice also rescinds the previous alternative technology information that NTIA put out. And so that is also something of clarifying the idea about low Earth orbit satellite subgrant or capacity grants, and essentially how that process would work. And then essentially kind of talking about our next steps. So states have until July 7th to submit their initial proposal correction letter. Again, we will be submitting that this Friday. We have to incorporate any locations that NTI provides to us that were part of a federal enforceable funding commitment where there was a default. We found out last Friday from NTI that there are no such locations in the state of Georgia. And so we will not have any additional locations to submit with our initial proposal correction. Then once, again, we receive that approval, we will move forward with opening subgrantee selection. And then once we do that, we have obviously a 90-day total requirement to get all of this done and submit our initial proposal to NTIA no later than Thursday, September 4th. I apologize. I know that was a ton of information. I tried to even really kind of condense their slides just for kind of speed here. We will post their full slide deck online so that you can go back through that. Again, it just, I think, provides kind of a helpful overview of obviously the policy notice. And with that, would like to go ahead and open the floor for any questions you may have. Definitely want to make sure we save time because I'm sure there's plenty of questions. Let's see, Greg?
Just so I'm clear, we're pretty much scratching the last application, and this one's replacing the last application. And are there any assurances that this NOFO will not change before doing it?
we don't expect that the policy notice would change, but if it does, we will certainly pivot and adjust and keep moving. But given the timeline that we have been given, I wouldn't expect that there will be a change. And then, as I mentioned before, you know, any previous round or any previous award according to NTIA has to be rescinded. And so the state of Georgia, you know, obviously we're in our negotiation phase for round one for BEAD. And so what we're going to be doing is any previously submitted applications will essentially just go back to draft status, where again, those applications can be resubmitted. Once you look at any of the data that might have changed based on the new list of BEAD eligible locations because of our true up. And then, so essentially, you know, all of the gating information that you previously put in, that was obviously previously scored, that can just be resubmitted. Essentially, you would just be looking to see, you know, anywhere that there is a new question, which there frankly are very few new questions, and there's a lot of questions removed, just because those are no longer items that we're allowed to score based off of. That again, it once
Before
you review the
before you
application, it can be resubmitted.
you were wanting us to be at 99.5% of all the locations. Is that thrown out the window too? And we can just do whatever we want with the locations?
So the only scoring metric based on the policy notice that we can look at is minimum BEAD outlay. Now, I will say as a caveat to that, nothing in the policy notice has changed our BEAD requirement to still get to 100% of the unserved locations. Then obviously underserved locations and community anchor institutions. And so, you know, while we will be using a different scoring rubric, the fundamental, you know, requirement of getting to everybody is still there. And so that is something where, you know, the only thing that we are going to be looking at based on this scoring is price. And again, we can only look at secondary criteria once if two applications are within 15% of each other. However, we still in 70 some days have to submit a plan of how we're getting to 100% of these eligible locations. And so, you know, we would always encourage people to, you know, keep as many locations in your application as you can. But obviously, based on this new scoring, you have to think about how to be the most competitive. However, we still have to find a way to get to 100%. And so that certainly, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how we, you know, we fit all those puzzle pieces together and do that in the next, you know, 70 some days.
Okay.
I think Jennifer's next.
Yeah, Jessica, thanks for all this information. I have two quick questions for you. The first one is related to the broadband serviceable locations list that will be submitted with your letter this Friday. My understanding was that should also include those unserved, the wireless technology updated information. Is that not going to be included? Is there not enough time to get that information back from providers before this Friday, or will that list be provided later?
We're still
And
We've gotten actually conflicting information about what data is due along with our letter to NTIA. So we're actually still working with them to clarify that. Based on the policy notice, we believe that it's only the list of locations that they send to the state, because locations could potentially being added back to eligibility. It's our understanding that if there are any unlicensed fixed wireless locations that are essentially coming off of the table because they are now deemed as served, I don't believe that that has to be submitted back to NTIA. I think it's just handled in the process of how we're looking at all of our other data related to the version 6 true up, and along with the, you know, truing up to the latest version of the FCC map related to availability. But again, we can certainly clarify that, because we are actually trying to get clarifying information from NTIA right now, because again, we believe that the only data that is actually required with your letter is actually the data that NTIA sent out on Friday, of which Georgia did not have any locations that were being added back, because there have not been any federal defaults since we did our challenge process.
Okay, so then do you have an idea of when that list of unlicensed fixed wireless will be published so that we can include those in our planning?
So the list of unlicensed fixed wireless locations have been available on our website now for almost a week. I believe our 7 days closes today. And so then it will depend on if we hear from the unlicensed fixed wireless providers for those locations to determine how we move forward.
Sure, and probably expected before the sub-grant window opens, probably, right?
I would expect that. Obviously, our goal is, especially considering how quickly we all have to go here, is that our goal is that the data that we put out related to the kind of the updated BEAD eligible list at this point, when subgrantee selection opens, hopefully we are in a position that that data doesn't change once we get to making awards. Again, obviously there's mechanisms if we do have to update that data, but we would expect that there should be essentially a clean list of what is eligible by the time the application window is open.
Okay, thank you for that. My second question is related to that reason code 5 and other reason codes. And this is just if someone is not necessarily planning to apply for BEAD, but does want to alert you that they do have served locations somewhere that they would like for you to consider being served, is there a mechanism for that? Or is the BEAD process the only way to get that information to you?
Yeah, so if you go to broadband.georgia.gov,
Mhm.
and I would think William has dropped the link in the chat as well. That is where you can contact us about the NTIA removal process. That's where kind of throughout, frankly, since I think December, we've been accepting locations for any of the reason codes to remove those from BEAD eligibility. Again, a lot of locations where it's a barn or hay bale that really shouldn't have been a BSL. We have also removed served locations throughout that process. And so that's just something that it's available on our website. You just need to use our template. That way we're collecting all of the information that we're going to need when we submit those locations in final proposal that they were taken out of eligibility. But essentially, if you already serve a location and for some reason it's not showing right now in the BDC, that's something that we can look at. But also hopefully, doing this true up to the latest version of the BDC should hopefully also take care of a lot of the locations that are already served too. But the process is on our website, and you don't have to apply for BEAD in order to send in information related to removing something based on those reason codes. Do we have any other questions? Sandy?
Hi. Just to clarify, so the true up to version 6 of the fabric, or the whatever the latest December 2024 data, that will happen without any input from the ISPs, such that if we've got locations that are reported with a served speed on the map, they will automatically be taken out of being BEAD eligible. We only need to provide input if there are things there that maybe since the data was filed that are now served that we might want to alert you to or something. But the strict true up to the map, that will be done without input. Is that correct?
That is correct. Previously, under the previous guidance, states had the ability to true up to fabric versions or the BDC. The policy notice changes that and makes it a requirement. And so we have to do it according to NTIA. And then, but again, if there are any locations that might not be reflected in the map, that's where we'd be happy to work with you using kind of the service codes and information that's on our website.
Okay, great. And then well, no, okay, that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thank you. Will existing applicants be required to have their project proposals re-certified by a professional engineer?
No, if it's already been certified by a professional engineer, that should be fine. What I would say though is if there's anything, if there is a large change in your project though, more than, a small number of locations, that might require recertification just for the fact that if your project area gets cut in half because half of that county is no longer eligible, I would say that that's a material enough change to your project that it would have to be signed off again. But that is something that we're happy to kind of give a definite answer in the FAQs related to that. And so we will add that to the list for Friday.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
There are a couple in the chat.
Okay.
We may take some of these on
Yeah.
our FAQs, but if you want to take a quick look.
Yeah, let me run through quickly here. Have we considered pushing back on the 90-day window? We are trying to get everything done in the time that we have been allotted. Obviously, we are talking to other states, and I think at the very least, talking with NTIA about the window that we have to be showing a good faith effort that we are trying to accomplish everything within the time that we have been given. I think that again, we're looking at the possibilities, but right now I think we're just very focused in, September 4th is the deadline, and we're going to do everything that we can to try to meet that. The eligible list of locations should be out hopefully by the end of the week or at latest early next week. Again, we have to finish our fixed wireless process in order to get the true final list of locations. Do we have an estimated time frame of how long the application window will be open for ISPs? It is going to probably have to be relatively short. Right now, we are looking at calendars. Some of it is dependent upon how long it takes for NTIA to approve our initial proposal correction. If that comes back really quickly, obviously that gives us a few more days to be able to keep a portal open. And so we are trying to scope out the calendar right now to figure out how we're able to keep the rounds open for as long as we can. However, there is the possibility we might have to run a second round. So we need to think about what timing looks like on that front. And then also, we have to have time to score the applications. And then also we have to post for 14 days of public comment. And so that really does, condense things. But we are, again, working with the calendars right now. Some of it does depend on how quickly we get approval from NTIA to have, a few extra days to have the window open. But that is something that we'll obviously share those dates as soon as we, we get all of our approvals in place and we can go ahead and get started. Let's see, with such a short submission window, is there anything GTA can do to streamline the application process, like reducing the amount of manual input in the portal? We are removing a number of questions. As I mentioned before on NTIA's slide, it does still make it a requirement that the states still have to verify that companies have the financial, technical, and managerial capability to do these projects. However, again, if you previously applied, all of that information will still be in the system. And so at that point, you're really just looking at updating any numbers in your project level information sections. Let's see, if applicants are not within the 15% threshold, will there be an opportunity to match lowest bidder during the negotiation phase? That is something that we will clarify in the FAQs. We're frankly still kind of looking at the timeline to see if there is the possibility for the time for negotiation. I'm also, again, talking with NTIA of, how this is essentially supposed to work of, is it just based on everybody submitting a best and final offer? And that's what we score the 15% off of. But we will provide a little bit more information on the FAQs on that one. Let's see, and the last question, then we'll jump over to Sam and Tyler. So in the new restructuring guidance, applicants must provide supporting documentation sufficient for the eligible entity to assess network applications and determine the proposed network architecture for project areas to meet the standard. Can you clarify what kind of documentation GTA is expected to deem sufficient to demonstrate the proposed network can easily scale speeds over time, evolving connectivity needs, and accommodate the deployment of 5G and future wireless technologies? That is something that we are clarifying in our FAQs, just because that is also something that, based on our letter of intent, we are asking applicants to clarify for us if they are planning to apply as priority broadband or if they're planning to apply as non-priority broadband. And that is obviously something that, we are going to require, documentation to make sure that anything that qualifies as priority broadband can meet all of those requirements that were in the IIJA. With that, we'll go ahead and jump over to Tyler, and then I will, after Sam, we can finish the list of questions in the FAQs or in the chat. Tyler?
I'm sorry. Hi, hey Jessica, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing good. One quick question. You touched on the 90, or y'all had took the 90% is going to be the best, bid for a location. Let's say you get half the county bidded and somebody bidded 100% of the county. The half the county obviously is probably going to win the location. Is it possible that the other half that did not win, could we still bid on that other half? Do we get first chance at that?
So essentially, as I mentioned before, we have to get to 100%. And our BEAD requirements have not changed of still getting to all unserved locations and then underserved locations and community anchor institutions given the available funding. And so that's why we're talking about, if there is a possibility of a negotiation, that's something we could potentially look at. Or again, that's why we're also talking about the possibility of a second round, because if ultimately a bid wins 50% of the county, we've got to figure out serving the other 50% of the county to meet all of our BEAD requirements to submit our final proposal. And so that's definitely something that kind of, once we see the type of coverage we have or don't have, then that's how we're going to ultimately determine if we're going to have to run another round.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I think we've got Sam next. Sam, do you have a question? Alrighty, let me go ahead and run through a couple more of these questions in the chat. When do you expect the benefit of the bargain bidding round to open? Again, a lot of that is dependent upon how quickly we get initial proposal correction approval from NTIA, which we'll be submitting on Friday. Given that, it is possible that it could be late next week. We are saying that ideally we want to open it within 3 business days of receiving our approval, and hopefully our portal will be ready by then with the changes that have been made. If it is not late next week, I would certainly expect that it is the following week. And again, at that point, we'll have more information about how long the round will be open, when it will close, and kind of have a much clearer path of what the remainder of our 90 days looks like, leading up to mid August, when we essentially meet our deadline for when the final proposal has to be publicly posted. Can you clarify the requirements for CAIs within a project area? So based on how we defined our CAIs, we do not believe that our CAI list needs to change based on the updated policy notice. However, it is still a BEAD requirement that we still need to serve the community anchor institutions that are unserved if we have funding. And so the only difference is obviously a BEAD eligible, BSL has to be funded at a different speed tier. A community anchor institution is still required to be funded at a higher speed tier, but we still do have the requirement to get to the community anchor institutions. And so that list will also be posted along with the list of unserved and underserved locations on our website. When does GTA expect the portal will be ready for applicants to begin editing previously submitted applications? That will be when the application portal opens. We want to make sure that we're running a fair process. And so previous applicants will not be able to amend their previous applications until the portal is open for any new applicants as well. And so again, it could be as early as late next week. But certainly would expect that it will be open by the following week. But again, as soon as we've got a clearer picture of when we're going to get initial proposal correction approval by NTIA, we will use our newsletter group to certainly message all of those dates to everyone. Let's see. Let's see.
Question.
Yes.
If we are new to this process, is there any advice or resources that you can point us towards as being a good starting place for us?
Yes. Definitely broadband.georgia.gov. We are in the process right now of also updating our applicant manual, where it will have a list of all of the questions so that you'll be able to see that even prior to the application portal opening. So I would strongly encourage you to look at all of that information so that you could go ahead and start kind of collecting all of that information, because as previously mentioned, like the questions that we ask in the gating process for financial, managerial, and operational capabilities, there is quite a bit of documentation that is required to be uploaded for those sections. And so once the applicant guide has been updated and posted, we'll also push a message out on our newsletter group so that everybody knows that it's available. But that will be a great way to start kind of collecting everything so that once the application portal does open, you've kind of gathered all your information and you just can kind of plug it in or upload it given, the particular question. So I'd definitely say I would really rely on the updated applicant guide as soon as we've got that ready and posted, just because again, that's going to obviously let you know all the questions that you will see in the portal. And so at that point, again, you can go ahead and start, pulling all that information together. And then obviously, once we've got the actual eligible locations on our website, I would encourage you to start looking at those project areas or any changes to the project areas given the new data as quickly as possible, so that again, what changes you might want to make, or if you're new to this, at that point, kind of you've already been looking at the data to figure out the best proposal to submit. So I would say, we'll always push out information using our newsletter group, but always kind of keep checking, broadband.georgia.gov, as soon as the locations are available, and then also as soon as that updated applicant guide is out. I think that those are going to be your best resources so that when the portal does open, you already know what to expect. You've already gathered information. And I think the biggest thing to probably stress to everybody involved is please make sure you submit your letter of intent by June 25th at 5 p.m. Otherwise, you will not be eligible to apply. So we strongly encourage everybody to please get their letter of intent in early. That's going to help us figure out kind of allocating resources to get through, obviously, the review and scoring of these applications to obviously meet our deadline. So it's really critical to make sure that everybody, regardless if you applied or not previously, submits a letter of intent if you even think that you want to participate. The letter of intent, is ultimately not binding. So if you submit a letter of intent and then ultimately you choose to not apply, that's fine. But if you do not submit a letter of intent by the deadline, then you will not be eligible to apply. Let's see, let me check the... Let's see. Should we check for locations to be updated daily? That's not a bad idea, but also when we post the locations online, we will also send it out on the newsletter group. So then that way you should also have a heads up. But it's always good to probably check back quickly. Let's see. Are there any changes to the community? Sorry, my computer. Are there any changes to community letters of support? Will letters of support be resubmitted, or previous letters sufficient? Based on the policy notice, NTIA has struck the local coordination section and requirements. And so we cannot score based on that any longer. And so letters of support will no longer be uploaded in the portal. And so based on the new scoring, you will not need letters of support. Let's see. Will a draft version of the application guide be released prior to the portal opening? Yes. That will be, again, as soon as we've got that updated, it will be released on our website, but it certainly will be before the portal opens. Do we have instructions for submitting the letter of intent on the FAQs or on the website? Yes. William already answered that one in the chat, but yes, it'll just be emailed to broadband@gta.ga.gov. And the link that William also dropped in there has essentially a list of all of the required elements for the letter of intent. I think that gets us to all of the questions that we have in the chat. Are there any other questions that anybody has before we go ahead and wrap up the meeting? Greg?
Jessica, the way I understood, I thought the negotiation phase was a lot different than I expected it to be whenever y'all sent out the prices of everybody to that community, which I really didn't think we would be giving everybody our prices and all out there. Is that how you're going to do the negotiation phase, or is it trying to get more I thought you were trying to get more locations or less locations and finding out and getting the high cost ones out or whatever. Whenever I thought that would be a one-on-one, not just, hey, give us another price and give it to us in 5 days.
Yeah, so we outlined that process in our volume 2, but again, we're still kind of scoping out what it's going to look like for this process because again, given our timeline, we are still working through kind of the process of if there is even going to be a negotiation phase. But we did say in volume 2 that we were going to ask everybody for kind of their best and final and kind of scoped all of that out. But there are a lot of things that were previously done in our grant program that either based on the policy notice, we no longer have the ability to do or score based off of. And then also, again, some of these items we are still looking at talking through with NTIA and trying to essentially determine what we have the time to do prior to essentially making final awards and creating our final proposal. So hopefully we'll have a little bit more information that we can put out in the FAQs related to kind of that structure and that process. But again, there are a number of things now based on the changes in the policy notice that will probably look quite different from the previous round.
I guess my feeling is that we all spent a lot of money doing the application the last time based on what y'all had told us we were going to do and the notice of funding and all. And it seems like we just all lost that money to go, and it may have given you some information, but that was very frustrating to me to see it completely change.
I certainly understand. You know, we can't control that the policy notice has obviously changed a lot of items in the program. And it's our requirement that, you know, we want to submit a final proposal so that we can bring this money to Georgia to try to get people who are unserved and underserved served. And, you know, unfortunately, we can't control that the guidance changed. What we have to do is we have to pivot, we have to implement the program, and, you know, we have to submit the best final proposal to get Georgians served by September 4th, as it stands right now. Well, thank y'all everybody for joining us. We certainly appreciate it. And again, a copy of this recording will be posted on our website at broadband.georgia.gov, along with a full copy of NTIA's slides that were shared earlier, and also the short slide deck that I shared, along with, again, as we have additional items like the applicant guide, the list of eligible locations available, and then obviously our timeline once we have a clearer picture of when we're going to receive NTIA approval. We will share all of that information with you. Certainly appreciate you joining us today. And again, always feel free to email us offline at broadband at gta.ga.gov for any specific questions. But with that, thank you all so much for joining us this morning.